there is a big risk that President Putin, who's actually played Steve Witkoff and played Donald Trump rather well over the last 7 months, will once again out-negotiate President Trump, and he will give away something in the interests of getting a quick deal.
President Zelensky has thanked Western allies for a joint statement calling for Ukraine to be involved in the US-backed peace talks with Russia. Well, they've certainly got a dog in this fight, what with being the actual country that's been invaded and all that. The show of support came after David Lammy and US Vice President DJ Vance met with European national security advisers at the Foreign Secretary's country retreat yesterday. A White House official has said that President Trump is willing to hold a trilateral meeting which would include the Ukrainian President Zelensky, but for now, Friday's meeting in Alaska remains a Trump-Putin summit as requested by the Russian leader. However, speaking to NBC News, the official added that the US administration is still hopeful that all three men might attend. Sir Mark Lyall Grant is a former UK ambassador to the UN and also a former national security to Number 10. Sir Mark, good afternoon to you.
Hello, Neil. Good afternoon.
Thank you for joining us. Look, there's still 5 days until this summit happens. If it happens, much could change. What are your, I suppose, best expectations for what could be achieved from it?
Well, of course, the best outcome would be if Zelensky were invited and Putin was to agree that Zelensky could be there and it was actually a trilateral summit. I don't think that will happen. And so I think the best outcome is that President Trump takes a tough line with President Putin on Friday, persuades him that he needs to sit down with Zelensky, probably with the Americans as well, and doesn't make any major concessions to Putin. That's the best scenario, but I don't think it's actually the most likely scenario.
Well, what's the most likely, that he will make concessions?
Well, I think the most likely is that he will make some concessions. He's already talked about land swaps. And of course, given that Ukraine doesn't hold any Russian territory, that means how much territory does Ukraine give away to Russia, rewarding them for their aggression 3.5 years ago. So I think there is a big risk that President Putin, who's actually played Steve Witkoff and played Donald Trump rather well over the last 7 months, will once again out-negotiate President Trump, and he will give away something in the interests of getting a quick deal, and then will present President Zelensky with a fait accompli. And if Zelensky can't accept that, then he will blame Zelensky for having blocked a possible peace deal.
The relationship between Trump and Putin, it has blown hot and cold since Trump came back into the White House for a second term. Is there any sense, though, whether Trump is not willing to entertain Putin quite to the extent that he was at the start? He feels that he's been mucked around by him, told one thing, then Putin goes and does another terrible thing. Can we not expect Trump to be a little more robust and resilient against Putin? And as we saw recently, he threatened these additional sanctions to come down upon the Russian economy. Can we expect Trump not to try to be a bit tougher with him?
I would certainly hope so. You know, he did shorten the timescale from 50 days to 10 to 12. That deadline has now passed. And he has certainly talked a little bit tougher. But the reality is that so far, all the pressure he has put has been on Ukraine and virtually none on President Putin. So, yes, if this slightly tougher language he's now using translates itself into action, then I think that is a much more promising scenario.
The Sunday Times reported today that there were European efforts, I guess almost a scrambled effort now, to pull together some alternative peace plan for Ukraine. Will their voices be heard by Trump if they're not there? And Putin, what agency does Europe have in this? And what role might they need to offer in terms of securing Ukraine's future security as part of any deal?
I think there is a chance that they have some influence. I mean, there was a meeting with David Lammy and JD Vance and the Ukrainian senior military aides yesterday. So presumably Vance will be passing on to President Trump directly what the concerns of the Ukrainians and the Europeans are. And he has influence certainly with President Trump, but Britain does too. I mean, one must give credit to Keir Starmer for the relationship that he's developed with President Trump, and therefore that gives us some influence with the White House. the fact that a number of Europeans have signed this statement, again, that shows that the Europeans are united and they do have a dog in the fight. After all, it is a question of European security beyond just the question of the future of Ukraine.
If Trump and Putin, though, agree this take it or leave it deal that includes Ukraine having to surrender territory and pretty much getting nothing back for it in return, do you have confidence Britain will denounce such a peace plan as a paper tiger, as nothing more than a victory and a concession to Putin? Do we have confidence that the British government will call this a bad deal if they see it as that?
I think so, yes. I mean, there's many nuances of grey in these possibilities because when he talks about land swaps, it's not clear whether, in fact, Russia would itself be satisfied with hanging on to the Crimea and Luhansk and Donetsk and giving back some of the territory it now occupies in Kherson and Zaporizhia, or whether, in fact, what Putin is hanging out for is the full 4 territories plus Crimea, which after all he has formally annexed under the Russian constitution, and giving up only the little bits of Kharkiv and Mykolaiv that he also has occupied outside those 4 eastern oblasts. So, there's a big difference between those two things. But for me, and I think for the Europeans, beyond the question of land giving away land, which is complicated for the Ukrainians because of the constitution, is what happens then? There are 2 essentials, I think, out of this for the Europeans, more important than land swaps. And that is, one, the security guarantees for the rest of Ukraine going forward. How will it be guaranteed that Putin will not come back for more, having had a pause to rearm as he has done elsewhere? So those security guarantees probably have to involve the United States in some way, have to involve NATO in some way. Secondly, what is the guarantee that Ukraine will have sovereignty over its future policy decisions? That if it wishes to join the European Union and it wishes to join NATO, it should be allowed to do so, that it should have the freedom for those policy choices. I think those 2 questions, the longer term issues about the future of Ukraine, are probably even more important than the actual land swaps. Because, look, we have to be realistic. After 3.5 years of war, it's very unlikely that in any peace deal, Ukraine will get back its full territorial integrity and have that agreed by the Russians.
Just finally, briefly, there does. I mean, it's very hard to be certain of this, but there does seem to be some polling of Ukrainians now, and a slight majority that do seem to favour some kind of peace deal, even if that means not, as you suggested there, recapturing all of the land that they might have held once. Do you think that internal pressure within Ukraine to just end this ceaseless violence is going to prey on Zelensky's mind, and that he will come under pressure to try to get something agreed at some point in the coming weeks?
Yeah, it's certainly true that there are many people who are obviously tired of the war and exhausted, and the casualties that the Ukrainians themselves have suffered weighs obviously in public opinion. But the polls do suggest that about 80% of the population are now against any formal handing over of territory to Russia to reward Putin for his aggression. So I think there's a sort of mixed view in Ukraine on this. But I think the Europeans probably accept that some form of deal of land for peace will need to be done and focus on this longer term guarantees for the sovereignty of what is left of Ukraine.
Okay, thank you very much, Mark Lyall Grant, for your time this afternoon. That's very interesting. Thank you so much.